Karen couldn't believe her eyes as she stared at the man standing on her neighbor's lawn. He was mowing the grass, clearly violating the strict guidelines set forth by the homeowners association she chaired. How dare he defy the rules she had worked so hard to enforce? Without hesitation, Karen marched over to the unsuspecting offender, her face twisted in a scowl. "Excuse me, sir," she shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" The man paused and turned to face her, a quizzical expression on his face. "I'm mowing my lawn, ma'am. Is there a problem?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "Yes, there's a problem. This is clearly in violation of the HOA's bylaws. You're supposed to have the lawn service come on Tuesdays, not do it yourself on a Saturday." The man chuckled and set down the lawnmower. "Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't your neighbor's lawn. It's my own property." Karen's jaw dropped, and she felt her face flush with embarrassment. "Your property? But that's impossible. This lot belongs to the Johnson family, and they're required to use the approved landscaping service." "Actually, ma'am, I bought this property last month," the man explained calmly. "I'm the new owner, and I prefer to take care of my own lawn." Karen's mind raced as she tried to process this information. She knew every property in the neighborhood like the back of her hand, and she was certain this was the Johnsons' lot. Unless, could it be? Suddenly, it dawned on her. Wait a minute. Are you telling me that you're not a resident at all? That you're just some intruder mowing a lawn that doesn't belong to you? The man's expression shifted, and Karen felt a surge of triumph. She had caught him red-handed, and now she would teach him a lesson about defying the HOA's authority. "That's where you're wrong, ma'am," the man said, his voice low and serious. "I'm a resident of this community, and this is my property. I'm not an intruder, I'm the owner." Karen's eyes widened as the realization hit her. No, that can't be true. You're lying." The man shook his head and pulled out his wallet, producing a deed that clearly showed his name as the new owner of the property. Karen's hands trembled as she stared at the document, her mind racing to comprehend the implications. But that's impossible," she sputtered. "I know every property in this neighborhood, and this lot belongs to the Johnsons." The man smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Well, it seems you may have made a mistake, Karen. This is my property now, and I intend to take care of it as I see fit." Karen felt her heart racing, a mixture of embarrassment and fury bubbling inside her. How dare this interloper defy her authority and challenge her intimate knowledge of the neighborhood? She opened her mouth to retort, but the words caught in her throat as the man continued speaking. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some more gardening to attend to. Have a nice day, Karen." Karen stood there, mouth agape, as the man calmly returned to mowing his lawn. She couldn't believe what was happening. This couldn't be real. Surely there had to be some mistake. Regaining her composure, Karen marched back to her own house, her mind racing. She burst through the front door, startling her husband, Frank, who was relaxing in his favorite armchair. "Frank, you'll never believe what just happened," she exclaimed, her voice laced with a mixture of panic and indignation. Frank looked up, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, dear? What's wrong?" "That new neighbor of ours, the one who bought the Johnsons' old place. He's been mowing his own lawn, in direct violation of our HOA bylaws." Karen ranted, her hands gesturing wildly. Frank sighed and set down his newspaper. "Karen, you know the HOA rules are there to maintain the community's appearance and property values. But maybe this new neighbor just prefers to take care of his own lawn." "That's just it, Frank," Karen interjected, pacing back and forth. "He claims that this is his property, not the Johnsons'. But I know for a fact that the Johnsons own that lot, and they're required to use the approved landscaping service." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that, dear? Perhaps there's been a change of ownership that you're not aware of." Karen shook her head vehemently. No, that's impossible. I know every property in this neighborhood like the back of my hand. This man is clearly trying to deceive us, and I won't stand for it." Frank regarded his wife with a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "Well, maybe you should double-check the records before you jump to any conclusions. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation for all of this. Karen paused, her brow furrowed in thought. You're right, Frank. I need to get to the bottom of this. She turned on her heel and strode towards the door, a determined look on her face. Where are you going? Frank called after her. To the HOA office. Karen replied over her shoulder. I'm going to find out the truth once and for all. As Karen hurried down the street, her mind raced with possibilities. Could it be that she had made a mistake? The very thought made her stomach churn with dread. After all, she prided herself on her intimate knowledge of the neighborhood and her unwavering commitment to upholding the HOA's standards. But if this new neighbor was telling the truth, and he was the rightful owner of the property, then she had potentially overstepped her bounds. The thought of admitting she was wrong filled her with a sense of unease, but she knew she had to get to the bottom of this. Reaching the HOA office, Karen steeled herself and pushed open the door, ready to confront the truth. Whatever it may be, Karen strode into the HOA office, her heels clicking on the tile floor as she approached the receptionist's desk. I need to speak with the property records manager immediately, she demanded, her voice laced with urgency. The receptionist, a young woman named Emily, looked up from her computer screen, momentarily taken aback by Karen's abrupt tone. Of course, Mrs. Wilkins. Let me see if she's available. Emily quickly picked up the phone and placed a call, her eyes darting nervously between the phone and Karen's impatient expression. After a brief exchange, Emily hung up the phone and turned to Karen. The property records manager, Ms. Hendricks, will see you shortly. Please have a seat, and she'll be with you shortly. Karen nodded curtly and took a seat in the small waiting area, her foot tapping impatiently on the floor. She couldn't shake the unsteady feeling that had settled in the pit of her stomach. What if she had been wrong about the ownership of the property? The very thought made her stomach churn. After what felt like an eternity, the door to the back office opened, and a middle-aged woman with a stern expression on her face emerged. Mrs. Wilkins, I understand you have a pressing matter to discuss. The woman, whom Karen recognized as Ms. Hendricks, said as she gestured for Karen to follow her. Karen stood and hurried after the property records manager, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Once inside the small office, Ms. Hendricks gestured to a chair, and Karen gratefully sank into it, her hands gripping the armrests. Now, what seems to be the problem? Ms. Hendricks asked, her tone professional but slightly impatient. Karen took a deep breath and began to explain the situation, her word spilling out in a rush. There's a new neighbor who has been mowing his own lawn, and he claims that the property belongs to him, not the Johnsons. But I know for a fact that the Johnsons own that lot, and they're required to use the approved landscaping service. I need you to confirm the ownership records for me. Miss Hendricks listened intently, her brow furrowing as Karen spoke. When the older woman finally spoke, her words sent a chill down Karen's spine. I'm afraid there's been a change in ownership that you were not aware of. Mrs. Wilkins, the property in question was purchased by a Mr. Thomas Garrison last month. Karen felt her heart sink as the realization dawned on her. But that's impossible. I know every property in this neighborhood, and that lot has always belonged to the Johnsons. Miss Hendricks shook her head, her expression almost sympathetic. I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilkins, but the records clearly show that Mr. Garrison is the new owner. He has every right to maintain his property as he sees fit, within the guidelines of the HOA, of course. Karen felt the blood drain from her face as the implications of this revelation sank in. She had been completely wrong, and her confrontation with the new neighbor had been a humiliating mistake. Her grip on the armrests tightened as she struggled to maintain her composure. I see, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for your time, Miss Hendricks. As Karen stood and made her way back to the waiting area, her mind was in turmoil. She had always prided herself on her attention to detail and her intimate knowledge of the neighborhood, but now it seemed that she had been horribly mistaken. The thought of having to admit her error to the new neighbor, let alone the rest of the community, filled her with dread. As Karen made her way back home, her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The revelation from the property records manager had left her feeling off balance and humiliated. How could she have been so wrong about the ownership of the Johnsons' old property? Lost in her thoughts, Karen barely noticed when she arrived at her front door. Fumbling for her keys, she let herself in, hoping to find solace in the familiar surroundings of her home. But as she stepped inside, she was met with the concerned gaze of her husband, Frank. "Karen, dear, what happened?" he asked, rising from his chair. "You look absolutely distraught." Karen sank into the nearest armchair, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Oh, Frank, it's been a dreadful afternoon," she lamented. "I was completely wrong about the ownership of the Johnsons' old property. It's not theirs at all. It belongs to a man named Thomas Garrison." Frank's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Thomas Garrison? I don't recall seeing a new family move in next door." Karen shook her head. "Neither did I, Frank. Apparently, he bought the property last month, and I had no idea. I went to the HOA office and confronted the man, only to be told that I was mistaken." Frank moved to sit next to his wife, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry to hear that. I know how much pride you take in your knowledge of the neighborhood." Karen felt a lump forming in her throat as she struggled to hold back tears. "I just don't understand how I could have been so wrong, Frank. I know these properties like the back of my hand. This is so humiliating." Before Frank could respond, the doorbell rang, startling them both. Karen glanced at her husband, a look of apprehension on her face. "Who could that be?" she murmured, her voice tinged with trepidation. Frank gave her a reassuring squeeze on the arm. "Why don't you let me get that, dear? You just stay here and try to relax." As Frank made his way to the front door, Karen's heart raced. Could it be the new neighbor, come to confront her about her earlier outburst? The very thought filled her with dread. When Frank returned, however, he was not accompanied by the new neighbor, but rather by a middle-aged man with a warm smile on his face. "Karen, this is Mr. Garrison, the new owner of the property next door," Frank announced, gesturing towards the man. Karen's eyes widened, and she hastily rose from her chair, her hands smoothing down the front of her dress. "Mr. Garrison, I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding earlier. I had no idea that you had purchased the property." To her surprise, Mr. Garrison chuckled and held up a hand. "Please, there's no need to apologize. Mrs. Wilkins, I understand completely. I know how attached the residents of this community are to their neighborhood, and I respect that." Karen blinked, taken aback by the man's gracious response. You do?" she asked, her voice small. Mr. Garrison nodded. "Absolutely. In fact, I was hoping we could start over on the right foot. I'd love to invite you and your husband over for dinner tomorrow evening, if you're available." Karen felt her jaw drop, and she glanced at Frank, who looked equally surprised. "Dinner? But why?" Mr. Garrison smiled warmly. "Well, I'd like to get to know my new neighbors, and I think it would be the perfect opportunity for us to clear the air. What do you say?" Karen hesitated, her mind racing. She had expected confrontation, not an olive branch. But the genuine kindness in Mr. Garrison's eyes was disarming, and she found herself unable to refuse. "Well, I suppose we could make time for dinner," she said, a tentative smile spreading across her face. "Wonderful," Mr. Garrison exclaimed, clapping his hands together. "I'll have everything ready for you both tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. I look forward to it." As Mr. Garrison turned to leave, Karen found herself feeling a glimmer of hope. Perhaps this unexpected encounter would not be as disastrous as she had feared. And maybe, just maybe, she could learn something from this new neighbor. The following evening, Karen and Frank made their way to Mr. Garrison's home, both feeling a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. As they approached the front door, Karen took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "Are you sure about this, Frank?" she whispered, her hand hovering over the doorbell. Frank gave her a reassuring smile. "Of course, my dear. Mr. Garrison seems like a perfectly reasonable man, and this is a chance for us to start over on the right foot." Karen nodded, her jaw set with determination. "You're right. I suppose I should at least give him a chance." With that, she pressed the doorbell, and the two of them waited with bated breath for their host to answer. The door swung open, and Mr. Garrison greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome, welcome. Please come in and make yourselves at home." Karen and Frank stepped inside, and Karen couldn't help but admire the tasteful decor and the inviting atmosphere of the home. As they were ushered into the dining room, Karen noticed that the table was set beautifully, with fine china and crystal glassware. "Please have a seat," Mr. Garrison said, gesturing to the table. "Dinner will be served shortly." As they settled into their chairs, Karen felt a palpable tension in the air. She glanced at Frank, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Mr. Garrison, I must say, this is a lovely home," Karen began, her voice slightly strained, "and the table setting is simply exquisite." Mr. Garrison beamed. "Why, thank you, Mrs. Wilkins. I do take pride in my home and entertaining." He paused, his expression turning more serious. "And please call me Thomas." Karen nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Well, in that case you must call me Karen." Thomas chuckled. "It's a deal, Karen. Now, I hope you both enjoy the meal I prepared. I wanted to make sure we got off on the right foot." As the three of them began to enjoy the delicious dinner, the conversation gradually became more relaxed and natural. Thomas proved to be a charming and engaging host, and Karen found herself surprisingly at ease in his company. At one point, Thomas turned to Karen, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, Karen, I've been meaning to ask you something. As the chair of the HOA, I'm sure you have a wealth of knowledge about this community. I'd love to hear your insights and perspectives." Karen blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the request. "Well, I suppose I do know quite a bit about the neighborhood. What would you like to know?" Thomas leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with genuine interest. "Everything, if you don't mind. I want to understand the history, the traditions, the values that make this community so special." Karen felt a surge of pride as she delved into her extensive knowledge of the neighborhood, sharing stories and anecdotes that showcased the tight-knit nature of the community. To her surprise, Thomas listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering his own observations. As the evening drew to a close, Karen found herself feeling a newfound respect and even fondness for her new neighbor. The initial confrontation had been a humbling experience, but this dinner had shown her that Thomas was not the enemy she had imagined him to be. "Thank you, Thomas, for a delightful evening," Karen said, shaking his hand at the door. "I must admit I had my doubts, but I'm glad we had the chance to get to know each other better." Thomas smiled warmly. "The pleasure was all mine, Karen. I look forward to many more evenings like this, and to becoming an integral part of this wonderful community." As Karen and Frank made their way home, Karen couldn't help but feel a sense of optimism. Perhaps this unexpected encounter had not only mended her rift, but had also opened the door to a new and unexpected alliance. In the days following the dinner at Thomas Garrison's home, Karen found herself in a rather peculiar predicament. Her initial hostility towards the new neighbor had gradually given way to a growing sense of respect and even, dare she admit it, camaraderie. As she presided over the monthly HOA meeting, Karen couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in her own behavior. Rather than her usual stern and uncompromising approach, she found herself listening more attentively to the concerns and suggestions of her fellow homeowners. At one point, a heated debate erupted over the enforcement of the community's landscaping guidelines. Karen, who had previously been quick to crack down on any perceived violations, found herself weighing the arguments on both sides with a newfound objectivity. "I understand the importance of maintaining a cohesive aesthetic throughout the neighborhood," she said, her voice calm and measured. "However, we must also be mindful of the individual preferences and needs of our residents. Perhaps we could explore a more flexible approach that allows for some degree of personal expression while still upholding our community standards." The other HOA members exchanged surprised glances, unused to such a diplomatic response from their typically unyielding chairperson. Even Frank, who sat quietly in the back of the room, couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at his wife's surprisingly conciliatory tone. As the meeting drew to a close, Karen found herself engaging in a private conversation with Thomas Garrison, who had been in attendance as a newly welcomed member of the community. "I must say, Karen, I'm impressed by the way you handled that discussion," Thomas remarked, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It seems your perspective has shifted since our dinner the other night. Karen felt a faint blush creep across her cheeks. Yes, well, I've had some time to reflect on my previous approach, and I must admit, your insights and genuine interest in the neighborhood have given me pause. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad to hear that. As I mentioned, I have a deep respect for the traditions and values that make this community so special, and I believe that by working together, we can find ways to preserve those qualities while also allowing for a certain degree of flexibility and individuality. Karen considered his words, her brow furrowed in contemplation. You make a fair point, Thomas. Suppose I've been so focused on enforcing the rules that I've sometimes lost sight of the larger picture, the well-being and satisfaction of our residents. Precisely, Thomas replied, his tone warm and encouraging. And I believe that with your leadership and my input, we can find a balance that benefits everyone. Karen felt a sudden surge of optimism, a sensation she had not experienced in quite some time when it came to her role as HOA chairperson. I'm willing to try, Thomas. If you're willing to work with me, that is. Thomas extended his hand, his grip firm and reassuring. I wouldn't have it any other way, Karen. I looked forward to our collaboration. As Karen shook his hand, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement for the future. With Thomas Garrison by her side, perhaps she could find a way to uphold the community's standards while also embracing a more inclusive and responsive approach. It was a challenge, to be sure, but one that she now felt empowered to tackle. In the weeks that followed, Karen and Thomas worked closely together to reshape the HOA's policies and approach. Gone were the days of Karen's unwavering enforcement of the rules. Instead, a more collaborative and flexible framework began to emerge. During their discussions, Thomas often shared insights gleaned from his own experiences as a newcomer to the community. He listened attentively to the concerns of his fellow residents and worked tirelessly to find solutions that balanced the needs of the individual with the broader interests of the neighborhood. The key is to find a way to preserve the unique character and identity of this community, Thomas had remarked during one of their strategy sessions. But we must also be willing to adapt and evolve to ensure that the HOA remains relevant and responsive to the changing needs of our residents. Karen, who had initially been skeptical of Thomas's approach, found herself increasingly drawn to his vision. She began to see the value in a more inclusive and understanding leadership style, one that prioritized the well-being of the community as a whole. As the month passed, the changes implemented by the new Karen-Thomas partnership were met with a surprising amount of enthusiasm from the residents. Homeowners who had previously been at odds with the HOA now found themselves eager to engage and contribute to the decision-making process. One day, as Karen was finalizing the details for an upcoming neighborhood barbecue, she received an unexpected visit from an elderly couple, the Johnsons. Mrs. Wilkins, we wanted to come by and express our gratitude, Mrs. Johnson said, her voice tinged with emotion. Karen, taken aback by the unexpected visit, gestured for the couple to come inside. Gratitude? Whatever for? Mr. Johnson cleared his throat, a warm smile spreading across his weathered face. Well, it's thanks to you and Mr. Garrison that we've been able to enjoy our retirement in peace. We were so worried that the new owner would try to force us out. But you've both been so understanding and accommodating. Karen's brow furrowed in confusion. I'm afraid I don't understand. What do you mean? Mrs. Johnson reached out and patted Karen's hand. Oh, my dear, wouldn't you know? Mr. Garrison purchased the property from us last month. We had no choice but to sell, as the taxes had become too much for us to handle on our fixed income. Karen felt the blood drain from her face as the realization dawned on her. But I thought you still owned that property. I was certain that it belonged to you. Mr. Johnson chuckled and shook his head. No, my dear. We were the previous owners, but Mr. Garrison has been an absolute godsend. He's even allowed us to continue living here, rent-free, for as long as we need. Karen sat in stunned silence, her mind racing to process this new information. All this time, she had been convinced that Thomas had somehow usurped the Johnsons' rightful ownership of the property. But in reality, he had been the one to ensure their continued residence in the community they had called home for decades. I don't know what to say," Karen stammered, her eyes wide with wonder. Mrs. Johnson patted her hand again, her smile warm and understanding. "You don't need to say anything, dear. We're just grateful to have such kind and thoughtful neighbors, both you and Mr. Garrison." As the Johnsons bid farewell and made their way back home, Karen found herself overwhelmed with a mix of emotions. She had been so quick to judge, so certain of her own knowledge and authority, that she had completely missed the nuances of the situation. But now, in the aftermath of this revelation, Karen felt a newfound respect and admiration for Thomas Garrison. His actions had not only preserved the well-being of the Johnsons, but had also demonstrated a level of compassion and community-mindedness that Karen had never expected from a newcomer. As she made her way to Thomas's home, Karen knew that she owed him a heartfelt apology and a sincere expression of gratitude. Karen knocked on Thomas Garrison's door, her heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and newfound respect. She had come to realize that her initial judgment of him had been not only misguided but also deeply unfair. When the door swung open, Thomas greeted her with a warm smile. "Karen, what a pleasant surprise. Please come in." As Karen stepped inside, she could feel the butterflies in her stomach. "Thomas, I'm afraid I owe you an apology," she began, her voice slightly trembling. Thomas raised a hand, his expression gentle. "There's no need to apologize, Karen. I know you were simply looking out for the best interests of this community, and I respect that." Karen shook her head, determined to make amends. "No, please, let me say this. I was completely wrong about you, and I'm so sorry for the way I behaved towards you in the beginning." Thomas listened patiently as Karen recounted her conversation with the Johnsons, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea that you had purchased their property, or that you were allowing them to continue living there rent-free. I felt so certain that you were trying to undermine the community, when in reality, you were being an incredibly compassionate and generous neighbor." Thomas reached out and placed a reassuring hand on Karen's arm. "Karen, I understand. You were acting in what you believed to be the best interests of the neighborhood. I don't hold any ill will towards you for that." Karen felt a surge of gratitude and admiration for this man, who had been so gracious and understanding despite her initial hostility. "Thomas, I don't know how to thank you. Your actions have shown me that there is more to being a good neighbor than just enforcing the rules. You've taught me the value of empathy and community-mindedness." Thomas smiled warmly. "I'm glad to hear that, Karen. And I must say, your own approach has also evolved in a wonderful way. The changes you've made to the HOA's policies have been a breath of fresh air for the entire community." Karen felt the sense of pride and accomplishment wash over her. "It's all thanks to you, Thomas. Your influence and guidance have been invaluable. I don't know what I would have done without you." The two of them stood there for a moment, a newfound understanding and respect passing between them. Karen knew that this was the beginning of a truly fruitful partnership, one that would shape the future of their community in profound and meaningful ways. As she prepared to leave, Karen turned to Thomas one last time. "I just want you to know that I consider you not only a valued colleague, but also a dear friend. I look forward to many more years of working together to make this neighborhood the best it can be." Thomas smiled, his eyes shining with sincerity. "The feeling is mutual, Karen. I'm honored to call you my friend, and I can't wait to see what we can accomplish together." With that, Karen stepped out into the warm evening air, her heart filled with a sense of optimism and purpose. The journey had not been an easy one, but she now knew that by working alongside someone like Thomas Garrison, anything was possible. As she walked home, Karen couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. From a rigid, unyielding enforcer of the rules to a collaborative, empathetic leader. It was a transformation that had not only changed her perspective, but also strengthened the very fabric of the community she held so dear. And as she looked towards the future, Karen knew that this was just the beginning. With Thomas by her side, the possibilities were endless, and she couldn't wait to see what they would accomplish next.